I'm going to go ahead and kick us off because we have a lot to talk about today, and I'm so excited. We're so excited to chat with you all about what is going on in this marketing ecosystem, particularly when it comes to AI and your visibility. And really, this is all so that we can share with you some of our core findings from our Local Visibility Index, or our LVI, which we are super excited to dig into today. But before we do, want to do some quick intros. My name is Casey McBride. For those of you that I don't know, I am SOCi Senior Director of Digital Customer Success and Value Strategy, and that is a mouthful. But essentially, in that role, it is my job to make sure that our customers understand, how to make sense of their performance and their metrics and what to do in these different marketing ecosystems that we all exist within. So that is the joy of my role, and I'll pass it over to Damien and then to our lovely guest Ali. So Damien, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Casey, and thanks everybody for joining. As Casey said, we're excited to be here today. My name is Damian Rawlison. I'm the Senior Director of Market Insights at SOCi. My job is to do market research of various kinds. And, every year, the most important report that we release on my team is the Local Visibility Index, which we'll be talking about today. We've just recently released the 2026 edition of that report, and we've got a lot of findings to discuss with you, as well as some specifics around our uh, featured brand for today, which is Men's Warehouse. So, Ali, we'd love to have you introduce yourself. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Damien. Thank you, Casey. And thank you for having me over. Yeah, I'm super excited about it. I hope everybody's doing amazingly great. Let's see. I've been at Men's Warehouse for about 6 years, and I oversee organic search and now AEO, obviously. There are like boatload of terms floating around, GEO, AEO, God knows, whatever you want to.
AEIOU, yeah.
A, the latest one I heard was LLMO.
Oh no,
Yeah, that's a new version of it. Yes.
we're all having an
But
identity crisis right now.
oh, we can spend the entire day going over this thing, right? Yeah. So, no, so excited to. I've briefly looked at the report and I'm looking forward to having this conversation and then go from there.
Awesome. So, Ollie, before we kick things off, I did want to call out kind of the elephant in the room, like we were just kind of talking about, is your title, right? Like Director of AI Innovation. That's new. Like I
Uh,
would imagine, we have a lot of attendees on the webinar today, and I doubt a lot of folks out there with a title like that are seeing titles like that. And so I'm curious, kind of in this expanded role, what does that title mean for you? What kind of things are you thinking about now? And kind of do you anticipate this becoming the title,
yeah.
the job, in the future here?
You know what they say, what's in the name? Right? So that's exactly the thing is what's in the title. So that's how I see it. But to be honest, at the end of the day, what we are doing, uh, I think we are seeing that across the organizations that is adapting to this shift,
Mm,
right? So this is a whole behavior shift that's happening. Behavior shift as in shifting from search to asking questions,
mm.
right? I don't know about you, Damien or Casey, how much, if you see yourself last year to where you were today, how much have you shifted, right?
A
I'm
lot.
sure a lot,
A
correct.
lot.
So as an organization, the question becomes, how do we adapt to it?
Mhm.
Because it's happening. We see that in Google AI overview. Even if you haven't shifted, they will shove it down your throat, to be honest. Chat GPT, it's already there. Gemini, it's also there. So the big question is, how do we adapt to it? And then what can we do to be present where our customers are?
Yeah.
And that's the bottom line. And I think so everybody is asking that question. Do we have an answer? Absolutely not.
It's all test and learn, all test and
Exactly. So that's I think so everybody's in the same boat and we are learning from it. So I'm looking forward again to sharing this data with a bigger group to have this conversation going. This is not end all, right? This is just getting started. We are just scratching the surface.
Absolutely. Well put. Well, why don't we get a little bit under the surface then here and talk about today's topic? So, before I really kind of dig in here and we start walking through the slides, I just want to encourage everybody who's here, yes, all of you, to please ask questions. We really enjoy kind of open dialogue and conversation. And like, I can't promise that we'll get to every single question that you ask, but throughout the presentation, if there are things that stand out to you or questions that you have for any of us here, we're happy to try and address them live. And maybe it'll even bring up some really great discussion that I bet others are curious about as well. So definitely open forum. Please do so. So again, without further ado, the local visibility index. If you haven't seen it, QR code right here. You can get access to it. You can see all of our awesome findings. There were almost 3,000 brands that we looked at, that we audited, that we analyzed all these different levels of visibility across AI, search, reputation, and social. And within that, there were some really awesome learnings that we had and some things that we uncovered that those brands that are showing up in these spaces are all collectively doing, or things that maybe you can benefit from or take advantage of as well. So we can go ahead and jump into it. First off, some of our key findings and the shift that we're noticing in general. And this next slide is a little scary to think about, but AI recommendations for a local brand are up to 30 times more difficult than inclusion in the Google 3 pack. So this one, when I say that out loud, and it's kind of like a damning slide, right? Just this one statement on this slide, it scares people a bit because for the past, what, like 15 years, 10, 15 years, all we've been talking about is how do we show up number one in Google and how do we show up in the 3 pack? And it's 3 pack, 3 pack, 3 pack. I mean, even this time last year, I was talking to customers about the 3 pack, and suddenly here we are talking about this brand new ecosystem that it's 30 times harder to show up for. We're going to talk about why that is and what some of those nuances are and some things that we noticed. So one really important thing to talk about when it comes to the world of LLMs and when answering some of these queries and these local queries that are occurring, LLMs do primarily use the sources that we're used to, like Google Maps, business websites, Yelp, Facebook, but man, does it love those niche websites. And I'm not even just talking about Reddit. I'm talking about like local community blogs and forums and websites, and it is craving this like contextual resource that can answer your question that goes beyond just all of the heavy hitters that we're all so used to optimizing. In fact, when we looked at ChatGPT, Perplexity, and other non-Google LLMs, they synthesize all these sources a little bit differently, and those platforms are only about 68% accurate when providing business information, which gets a little scary for folks, right? Because it could get things wrong as far as your name, address, phone, as far as your hours of operation, even sometimes website links. I've seen it pull the wrong link in. And that's because it's trying to create this narrative from all of these different sources. Now, Gemini, it's a little bit safer, right? Because it's grounded in Google Maps as a primary source. So it's usually a lot more accurate than some of the other ones that we've noticed. Damien, I know that Damien is like the godfather of the LVI guys, so I will reference him quite a bit here. This is like his brainchild. Any other kind of like important notes here or things that you saw as far as like this makeup or this accuracy? I think this is one of the most alarming things that our customers tend to notice or point out.
Well, I think one of the things I would want to point out in this part of the presentation is just that there is a path that you can follow to improve the accuracy of results on platforms like ChatGPT. But it's not overnight and it's not direct. It's more indirect. You know, ChatGPT and other LLMs, they use this technique called RAG, which basically it's called it means retrieval augmented generation. If they can't answer a question, or if the question is very kind of an up to the minute type question, they're going to use the internet or use a resource to go out and retrieve an answer. And with a tool like ChatGPT, primarily they are going to Google, to your website, to these sources that are listed here, and then a bunch of miscellaneous possibilities. But if you really want to influence how you show up in those results, those four top resources are the most important ones to be consistent and complete and up to date and accurate on. And so that's kind of good news, I think, if you focus on Google, on your own website, on Yelp, on Facebook, and then as you can, you may want to optimize certain other sites that might be important in your vertical. Um, but those four are going to be the most important ways to influence that accuracy percentage. And it's only when they don't agree with each other, or, lots of brands maybe think Yelp is kind of, not as important for us because it's not relevant for our industry. Well, Yelp is referenced by LLMs all the time across all industries. So you really do need to have that consistent, more holistic approach to listing management in order to improve those results. Ali, is that resonating with you? Is that
Absolutely,
making
Damien.
sense in terms of your strategy?
No, 100%. And I really loved what you brought up, right? The whole retrieval, the RAG model, right? And the key is if you don't have that information, the LLM models can't retrieve it. So, and that's what our core focus is, to kind of make sure that our information is available. If we don't have the content, if we don't have the information that it's, for example, a customer is looking for, there's no way it can pull that information. And then it goes around looking for it, and that's where the inaccuracy happens, right? A lot of time I've seen the article where people are saying, hey, this LLM model is pulling out absolutely incorrect data. Where is it getting that from? Because if you don't provide it, and the other thing is also you called out is the consistency, right? And although you would think that why wouldn't it be consistent, but you'll be surprised. And I think I shouldn't be saying that. And it's not only hours, right? It's hours, for example, the sizes, or for example, prices. It goes across the board. And what you are talking about, for example, very focus on the Google Maps and Yelp, that's just one piece of it, right? So there's so many other factors that they're actually looking for it. So that the one that I bucket this into is local, for example, maybe social, but there's multiple other pieces that has to be created. For example, it can be in the form of content, it can be in the form of, for example, the videos, it can be in the form of, for example, a whole journey page. For example, if somebody is looking for what to wear for my winter wedding, right?
Mm,
So do we have all the necessary pieces? And the piece that you are talking about is just a one small puzzle of the entire,
larger.
yeah,
Yeah.
larger
Definitely true.
puzzle. A
Yeah,
smaller
so
piece to a larger puzzle. Yes,
a brand like Men's Warehouse is going to want to appear in LLM results for lots of topics, not just
correct.
local transactionable, where do I buy a suit near me right now?
Yeah,
Which is a good thing to point out. That's kind of the focus of the LVI research, but your brand visibility in AI is a much larger topic for sure.
yeah. And it indirectly impacts everything, right? So everything is connected. You can't just say that, hey, I just can do one or two things. It has to be, you have to look at a full picture. But
Mhm.
but this is definitely a part of it.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Another huge thing that I think has become so much more important. I know, I think Ali, you even hit a little bit on reviews, and I saw some questions in the Q&A about responding to reviews on Yelp, and um, reviews have really become like a gate to
Hmm.
LLMs. It goes beyond, like, I think when we talked about reviews prior, I used to have conversations even as recent as like around this time last year, where my whole focus was talking about, well, if you want to show up for best whatever near me, you better have at least 4.0 or more. And so 4.0 was kind of like this goal that everybody had, was to get on average 4.0 across all their business listings. Well, LLMs have drastically changed that. It's now kind of gated, and it's more like unless you have on ChatGPT 4.3 stars, the odds of you getting recommended by the LLM are pretty slim. And it's going to look for alternatives that have kind of that higher favored crowdsourcing score. It wants to know that your brand can be trusted. Um, and so reviews, when it comes to LLMs, to me, it's like they've always been important, but now it's like business critical. It's like if you are not responding to these reviews, generating more reviews, if you are not hyper fixated on your brand sentiment across all of these different review channels, you're really going to miss out when it comes to visibility, particularly in the LLM space.
Yeah, and I think you nailed that, Casey. It boils down to trust,
Mhm.
right? Don't think about reviews. Don't talk about 3 star. It's about trust. It's a customer trust. When was the last time you went to a restaurant to a star or a store without looking at the reviews?
Uh,
Damien or Casey, right?
Mhm.
Always. If they don't have
Exactly.
reviews, I'm terrified. And if they have
Correct.
few reviews, I'm terrified.
So,
Uh,
so
yeah,
the thing is, it comes down to the customers, right? So we need to make sure that we are providing what the customers are looking for, and that's what the LLM models are also looking for, right? So if you think of it, it's very simple.
Mhm.
You focus on the customer, you do the right things, that will follow reviews, that will build trust. Everything will come together.
100%. I did see a question. Sorry, join late. How do you increase your rating on LLMs? So it comes from a couple different sources. We see primarily on ChatGPT, we see a decent amount of alignment with like a star rating on Google. I've actually seen it like pulled in, but that's not always the case. In fact, sometimes that star rating can be a conglomerate of other star ratings that it's found about you in these other review sources. So if you think about like your star rating on Yelp might be a 3.1, your star rating on Google might be a 4.2, your star rating on Bing might be whatever it is in Apple. Sometimes those LLMs are taking everything it sees and then generating
Mhm.
a recommendation from that. So it's really about having that like universal strategy across the board to be able to impact AI. Um,
It goes,
but
sorry to interrupt you, Casey. It goes back to the comment I was making on the other slide, which is you cannot influence it directly. There were some questions I saw in the Q&A about does ChatGPT have a direct API for Google
Mhm.
reviews? No, there is no direct connection. Even, not to get into this too deep, but the way ChatGPT gets to Google data is supposedly through an indirect third-party provider. So they're just basically scraping that data from those primary sources. But remember, Google, Yelp, Facebook, those are the typical sources. And then you get into the sort of this long tail of other possibilities. If you want to increase your rating on ChatGPT, you have to go to those platforms. You have to encourage people to review your business on Google. You have to do things like responding to reviews, which encourages more positive feedback, and you have to look at, increasing your star rating through service improvements and other harder tactics as well. Ali, I'm sure you guys must talk about this sort of thing internally all the time.
Mhm.
But that's really the only way is to go to those root platforms that the LLMs are referencing to get the star ratings.
I
Yeah. Uh, Sorry, go ahead, Casey.
No, I was just going to say, I think something else on reviews too that I get asked a lot because the narrative for a long time was the reviews are a quote unquote ranking factor, but the text in the response to the review isn't necessarily a ranking factor. And while maybe that's still the case for traditional search, that's actually not really the case for LLMs. In fact, a lot of the review responses that you're giving, that content is more just contextual evidence for an LLM. So I don't want to expand too far off of like the star rating analysis here, but just something else to think about as you're considering like responding to reviews and why it's important or why it's not important. LLMs can see, kind of what you're saying, the conversations that are happening in these different channels and get more of that contextual evidence on who you are and what you do. So just trying to really stress the importance of actually responding in this space.
Yeah. I think that the tricky part becomes because it tends to vary based on locations also. So, for example, there will be places, for example, if you go to Midwest, or for example, if you're in West Coast, there's much more prominence. For example, in some area, there's Yelp. So then you see those difference in, for example, those ratings. But at the end of the day, I'm just going to echo what you said, Damien and Casey, that there is no platform that you can go and enter in ChatGPT or ask people to, hey, submit the reviews in ChatGPT. It is cumulative, but
Mhm.
you have to look for those different location, whatever your stores are. Look at the competitors where they are. Make sure that you are over there also, and then go from there. So
Absolutely.
it is kind of a moving target in that perspective.
Absolutely.
Um, higher review count is also a
Mhm.
trust signal. I did some research with ChatGPT where I was able to determine that if you had like a business with a 5-star rating but only 1 or 2 reviews, as compared to a business with a lower rating but more reviews, as long as it was still a positive rating, ChatGPT would be more likely to recommend the business with more reviews.
Mhm.
And that's because, only a couple of reviews is just not enough of a signal to determine what people really think about a business. But if you got 100 reviews and your rating's above 4.1 or 4.2, then you're probably a pretty likely candidate for recommendation.
Absolutely. So something else to consider here too is AI is a lot more selective. So I talked about this a little bit in the beginning. It's really challenging. So um, we see about 36% of brands appearing in Google for the three pack for their top keyword. But then as we trickle out to the different LLM sources, it's a lot more challenging. So on average, brand locations are recommended by LLMs at a rate of 6.5%, with ChatGPT being by far the hardest LLM to get recommended, and at 1.2% of the time, a brand being recommended by ChatGPT. So it is cutthroat in that space. And also no surprise to see Gemini a bit higher than the other ones, as like we said, it's kind of rooted in some of that like Google-esque experience. Um, any thoughts or commentary on this one, guys?
No, nothing to add. I
Yeah,
think so. It's numbers, and I think so. It's moving. You won't be surprised, like down the road in 2 weeks, this numbers completely changes.
true,
That's true. In
true.
fact, we've run the numbers more than once, and they don't always come out the same. This is like a snapshot, but I should point out that when Casey was citing before that it's 30 times harder to be recommended by up to 30 times harder to be recommended in AI than in the Google 3-pack. That's basically taking this 35.9% in the 3-pack number on the left and comparing it to the 1.2%
Of
recommendation rate in ChatGPT on the right. That's where that 30x comes from.
makes sense.
There are some questions in the chat. Did you guys see them or maybe we're answering?
Yeah, I was looking through some of them. I just, in the interest of time, I wasn't sure how many of them we could get to. There was one that I wanted to bring up to Ollie and Damien, and I don't know if we have an exact answer, so I'll be curious to hear you guys' thoughts. But someone said, interest to know how AI search results impact B2B marketers who don't rely on consumer reviews. Initially, I would kind of argue that B2B, there's still an element of reviews. There's still an element of like sentiment that's super important. I think one of the core things that you want to do from a B2B aspect is understand what kind of maybe like sentiment websites or yeah, like websites exist out there to try and up your brand. So, for example, like SOCi is a B2B type of company, right? And so we know that there are certain websites out there and citation sources that will evaluate other companies like ours and provide essentially a score for us, or it's like a review platform for our specific niche industry. So I would say even if your traditional isn't B2C, where consumers are leaving reviews on like a business listing, there are still going to be forums or websites or things out there that are essentially like reputation citation type of signals that would still be impactful for your B2B business.
Yeah, I would just add, I mean, we are a B2B business and we don't look so much at how we're reviewed on Yelp, but we certainly look at how we're reviewed on G2.
Mhm.
And if you look at LLM responses in your B2B sector, you're probably going to find that they're typically going to be relying on the same two or three sources, whatever those might be for you. It might be LinkedIn, or I'm not sure, what would be the most likely, but our lens for the LVI is about people asking for local recommendations for B2C. And that's where we come up with, Google and Yelp and Facebook as the most common sources. But for B2B, it's going to be a different set. There will be a known universe of them. It's just going to be a different set of
Yeah.
sources. Yeah.
And then I'm going to take one more question, and then for the sake of time, maybe we keep going. And if we can get through some more of the questions, we definitely will. But there's been a couple asks around, SOCi obviously has an agent that responds to reviews on behalf of the customer at the hyperlocal level. And there's some questions around, is there any evidence that LLMs don't prefer that AI generated responses compared to, a traditional person responding? And one of my favorite stats was around the time when we first started launching our Genius Agents project or product. And we noticed that on average, when somebody responded to a review and it was just a human responding to said review, about 3% of the time, the person who left the review, the customer, would go back and update their star rating, meaning they were satisfied. It's not very common, but it was 3% of the time we noticed they were satisfied with the response and they would change their star rating. For the customers that used AI, we actually noticed that customers were going back 7.5% of the time versus the 3% of a traditional human responding. When it was AI responding, we noticed that 7.5% of the time the customer would go back satisfied with the response and would update their star rating to something more favorable. Now, I recognize that that's a relatively small stat, right? But pretty glaring difference between customer behaviors there on something that doesn't always happen that frequently. There are some other signals and things like that, but the last thing I'll say is a lot of times what customers were doing before agents who could respond to reviews was using like templated responses or like pre-approved text or whatever it was, and it felt very robotic. And what we find with using an agentic type of tool is that every response gets to be a bit unique, and it almost feels more human in a way than some of the templatized approaches that brands used to take. Whereas the AI agent, like I said, almost sounds more real in a lot of ways, oddly enough. So just something to consider if that's something that you're looking to add to your workflows.
I think to get, reference Jake's very specific question, I don't think LLMs, or at least I haven't seen a lot of evidence that LLMs are looking at review responses, literally speaking. They don't really seem to focus on that type of content as much. But on the other hand, to Casey's point, we're going to see more and more and more AI generated content out there where the differentiation between what's effective and what's not is going to be more about whether the AI is doing the right kind of job, right? If they're responding in a timely, authentic, on-brand fashion to your reviews, that's definitely better than the more than 50% of businesses that don't respond to their reviews at all,
Mhm.
right? And it's a matter of deploying AI in a smart way rather than, introducing error into the system, and or inauthentic responses, which certainly aren't going to do anybody any favors. But anyway, I think we're just going to see more and more of that kind of content.
100%. And I will clarify one thing on that, Damien. We have gotten an indication from Google that the AI like summaries within business listings that they're generating are actually referencing that review copy. So just something to keep in mind as well. So in a lot of ways, if you maybe even do have an agentic solution replying on your behalf, there are ways to kind of train that agent to maybe inject certain type of terms or things that you definitely want to appear for. Just something to keep in mind as you're considering like a review response strategy.
Mhm.
Cool.
Yep.
Well, I'm going to get into another aspect of the LVI research that I think is pretty interesting, and we're going to start with a kind of another, we think, attention-grabbing stat. We took a look at a subset of retail brands. We're going to show you a part of that data in a second. And we looked at those brands in the rankings for traditional search as opposed to AI. And what we found was that there was only a 45% overlap between the top retail brands in traditional local search as compared to the top 20 retail brands in AI. And there's a couple of things to say about that stat, but I'll leave you with that for now. And then just to explain a little bit, what do we mean by search visibility as opposed to AI visibility? So these brands were ranked according to both criteria. When it comes to search, our methodology within the LVI is to use the Google primary category. So for Men's Warehouse, I assume your primary category is men's clothing store or something along those lines, Ali. So we would use a term like that. And then we would search in every relevant zip code, meaning every zip code where the retailer has a location, both in Google Maps to look for the local results, the Google business profile, basically. In Google Search, we would look for the local landing page or website for the business to appear in the organic rankings. And then we also look at rank position on Yelp, whether the brand appears on page one for a similar type of search on Yelp. And then we look at the rate of claiming their profiles, the completeness of those profiles, and some of the on-site SEO signals as well for local landing pages. So all of those factors together, this is kind of a brief summary, but that's kind of how we define search visibility. So for AI visibility, and by the way, the search methodology has been around for a few years. We haven't really changed it very much. This has been our approach. But when we came to add AI to the LVI this year, we had to develop a methodology for measuring AI visibility. There isn't really, we were just talking earlier about the war of the acronyms, whether it's AIO or GEO or whatever, LMNOP. There's a lot of flux right now in that conversation. And that's also true when it comes to the concept of AI visibility. But one thing that we wanted to avoid was to focus too much on terms like ranking, because ranking is really an old school term that relates to search, the 10 blue links and are you number one or number 10 or on page two. In AI, there is no page two. And it's also unpredictable how many businesses are going to be recommended. If I just say, I'm looking for a men's clothing store that has these characteristics, can you recommend one near me? The AI might recommend just one business, depending on how specific my question is, or maybe three or four or five, and maybe a different number if you ask the question again. So our method, we wanted to develop something that would be very repeatable, asking the same question the same way every time. So what we did was we asked our three AI platforms, ChatGPT, Gemini, and Perplexity, to recommend 10 businesses of type X and market Y. So, men's clothing stores in Milwaukee or whatever the market where we were looking for our target business. We forced it to give us 10 so that we could define a kind of a range where if the target brand appeared in positions 1 to 5, we would say, okay, in any AI recommendation, this brand is likely to be recommended. If there's 3, if there's 4, if there's 5, not knowing how many businesses will be returned, positions 1 to 5 would be the likely to be recommended range. And if they were outside of that, they were either unlikely to be recommended or maybe they didn't show up at all. And then we aggregated those results by the brand and also by industry to come up with this concept of percent recommended within the three platforms. And then for AI visibility overall, we also looked at profile completeness, accuracy of profiles, relating back to that 68% accuracy figure for the LLMs that we mentioned earlier, as well as sentiment in the form of things like star ratings. So we looked at all those things in aggregate to come up with this AI visibility measurement. And basically what we found, again, for retail brands, so there's 171 brands in the LVI, which are in the retail industry and which we define as enterprise brands, meaning that they have at least 500 locations. So of those 171 brands, we looked at them in traditional search as compared to AI. And what you're seeing is those two lists side by side. search is on the left and AI is on the right. And the ones that are shaded in gray are the brands that appear in both lists. So that's how we get to the 45%. So only the ones shaded in gray are both at the top in search and at the top in AI. And that tells us a couple of things. One of the things it tells us is that there is a correlation. So 45% is a significant correlation. In other words, if you do all the things that will cause you to succeed in traditional search, you're more likely to be visible in AI. However, it's also not a guarantee. So, and Men's Warehouse is a good example. And we're not necessarily calling you guys out, Ali, but just making the point that you guys are doing incredibly well in the traditional search rankings, showing up at rank position 6 in the top 20 retailers, but your ranking is not as high, not in the top 20 for AI. And you're our client, so we're doing this work with you, and yet we are seeing that it takes some time. It's not as predictable. There are things that we have to continue to do to uncover those factors that are going to make sure you're also ranking as well in AI visibility. Any thoughts about that, Ali?
No, not much to add, Damien. My thing is, again, that's the nature of it, right? That, hey, what you do, and there's a lot of discussion that what you do for SEO, just keep doing what you're doing. Definitely that's important, but there is a lot more that needs to be done. And it's one of those things where everybody needs to understand that, and that's where we are also at it. So again, we're not gonna hold this against you in some form or shape, uh, saying that, hey, how come, although like we work with you guys, we are not on the LLM? But this is something that we need to adapt to it. And it's going to be a lot of test and trial. And that's what we are doing. That's where we are in the current phase, right? So we are testing out the reviews. We are like making sure that the consistency is there and monitoring it. And yeah, so I think we have made a lot of progress in getting that visibility in those top 20. And obviously, it's time consuming. We don't know how updated, for example, the chat GPTs of the world, how soon they updated. So that is something that we are actually monitoring very closely. And that's definitely top of our mind. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually got a really good question yesterday about kind of like, well, what is the difference, I guess? Like, what are they doing so differently that they're showing up in AI? And one of the top things that I noticed, obviously there's a lot of things, and I know we're addressing a lot of these things today, but one of the top things I noticed is this concept of like semantic relevance. And what I mean by that is like I feel like back in 2013, 2014, and some of the days of SEO, there was this like content is king. And, a lot of teams even had like specialized SEOs that were content writers or SEO content writers who specialized in kind of, how to write for search engines. And I think in recent years, it's kind of dwindled a bit. I think it's like been a little not as important. And then with LLMs, I think that this concept of semantic relevance and this expansion of copy and content and providing more context is what I notice a lot of the brands who are showing up very highly for AI results tend to provide. And something that you mentioned really early on, Ollie, you touched on how you guys might be building certain web pages that might dive into like things. I don't remember exactly what the topic was, but like things to think about when buying a suit or things to look for or and I think we're going to continue to see this rise in importance of that contextual relevancy and content and kind of building up of that because it's no longer just about like best suit for a spring wedding. It's now like, I am 6'5" and I really struggle to buy a suit and I really look great in the color blue, but this is a springtime wedding. Is that appropriate? And what material should I use? And oh yeah, once I have all that information, where do I go to buy it? And
yeah.
so because it's become so much more conversational, that contextual relevance, that semantic relevance is going to become so crucial to our optimization strategies.
No, you're right, Casey. And it comes down to the big basic question is like what are the first of all customers are asking, right? And what exactly is, for example, these search assistants are actually picking up, right? So the thing is, whatever they're asking, do we have that content? And then obviously the search assistants or the chat GPTs of the world are not finding it relevant, right? So if Men's Warehouse is not showing up for you saying, I'm 6'2" and big and tall, I want to go to winter wedding, we are not probably satisfying those needs, and that is the part that has to be addressed, making sure that the content has been there in the previous, you may say, version of this SEO AEO. It was very much focused on e-com. Content was there, but then it dwindled off slightly. But it, to exactly to your point, it definitely coming back, but it has to be addressed in a very systematic way.
Yeah.
And I really feel that's a bigger question. How do you scale it?
Oh yeah.
Scalability is, I really feel, is $1 million question. It's like, how do you, because there are so many prompts. You can do prompt clusters. Again, we can go all day talking about it, but so we have a few approach that we are doing. We are addressing it in the form of prompt clusters. We are addressing it based on locations. We are creating content. For example, it's around tailoring. We are definitely looking at who is showing up. We are analyzing what their reviews are. We have our reviews are our reviews lower than that? What can we do to improve the local reviews, so on and so forth. So there's a whole playbook that we have to focus on, and then obviously we are partnering with you guys to get part of it going.
Absolutely.
I wonder if we should address, there's been a few questions coming in, maybe just one. Are we seeing a difference in AI affecting visibility and rankings between Google Maps versus Google Places and GBP optimizations? I'm not sure that there's a difference in AI affecting visibility in Google Maps versus Google Places. I guess I'm thinking about the answer to that question. The AI features are showing up in those different Google surfaces in different ways, definitely. So Gemini, for instance, was recently launched as a tool within Google Maps, the app, the mobile app. That's not yet appearing in Google Places, or if that's, if the search version of Google local results. So definitely it's kind of hard to keep track of the rate of these changes. Like Casey, you were just talking about reviews being referenced in business descriptions. That may be more in search, whereas in maps you're going to see Gemini showing up more as an assistant. And there are lots of variations in the way AI is appearing, which is part of why we focused just on Gemini, the app, when we were assessing AI visibility, because all of those ways that AI is showing up in Google, including AI overviews and AI mode, they're all powered by Gemini. So Gemini was kind of our way of kind of cutting to the chase wherever AI might be appearing in the purchase journey of somebody searching for a local business. If it's Google, then Gemini's the thing that's powering that.
Mhm.
Well, we have some more details about Men's Warehouse to share, and this is an opportunity to introduce what we call our local visibility quadrant chart. So you can see that the Men's Warehouse logo, the brand is showing up in the leaders quadrant, which is great, and it's a good way of kind of playing out what we saw earlier, that Men's Warehouse is, number 6 enterprise retail brand in search. Your rankings are obviously pretty strong overall. What defines the brands that find their way into this leaders quadrant is that they're both following all of the kind of best practices that we would recommend. That's going to give you a high optimization score within the LVI. That means you're claiming all of your profiles and filling out all the information, and posting on social, and responding to your reviews, doing all the things that we would recommend that a brand should do in order to gain high visibility. But then you're also seeing strong performance. That's the over to the right part of the stat. And strong performance means, high search rankings, high ratings, high rates of engagement. It's only a combination of following all the best practices and seeing strong results that's going to place a brand in that leaders quadrant. And you can kind of see how the top how all retail brands are spread out in the distribution of the data here, all these white dots that are brands other than Men's Warehouse. There's kind of a journey from the lower left to the upper right that brands can follow, where at the beginning they may not be doing much, not seeing great results. And the more work that they do along the lines that I've been describing, the more likely they are to find their way into that leaders quadrant. But it's a long game. It's kind of like what we were talking about building out content for AI. That's one example of how it takes a long time to build that foundation. But as you can see in these uh, LVI results on the bottom right for Men's Warehouse, that they are at or above the benchmark scores for the clothing and accessories industry for all of the pillars that we measure within the LVI, which are AI being the new one this year, search, reputation, and social. So it's really a combination of all four of those things working together that is going to put a brand into that top echelon. And so too, Ali, you were mentioning earlier the influence of, videos and social platforms and all this other content. These things are very interrelated to each other. In fact, it's a combination of, search optimization, reputation management, social media marketing. All three of those things are going to be valuable on their own. We're going to see people more and more turning to younger consumers turning to social platforms for local recommendations and so on. So these things are valuable in their own right, but all of them also feed into AI visibility. So it's a very kind of closely integrated network of activities.
Absolutely.
So, Damien, the question becomes, right? So, if you would have started with this slide showing that, hey, we are actually doing great compared to the benchmark, but AI visibility, we are not even on the radar, right? So, what is it that is going to tip it over, right? So, is it like, for example, reputation is at 61%? Does it mean that we have to be at 70%, or does it mean at 80%? I know there is no solid answer for it, but it's a question to ask is like, what does it take? Like, yeah, it's great to see the numbers, but it's not getting the result from an AI perspective, right? And that's what I know we are working towards it, but it would be great to kind of say, hey, this is the tipping point. You just have to get about like 65% and woohoo, you get into the AI results. But and that's the part that I was talking about. It's going to be test and learn.
Yeah.
Which is exactly what this research is, uncovering those factors so that we can make those strategic moves, right? Right now we don't know what we don't know. So we're
Mhm.
really just trying to uncover, okay, where are people performing? And we're looking for, deeper into correlations, which would tell you, if you exceed this threshold of performance, then it does tip you over into the next echelon when it comes to AI performance. But we're going to have to be, setting these things over time, rerunning the data, seeing what happens when we make changes. Right now, we're just kind of uncovering, okay, this is what the performance is looking like.
Yeah, it'd
But
be great to have this again in 6 months after we have executed some of the learnings and some of the things that we are already doing to kind of
right.
say, hey, what was it actually made a difference?
Absolutely. And, there are some defining characteristics that kind of leads us into our next slide. So we know, for instance, that Men's Warehouse is performing at a much higher level than many other brands. And I don't mean to call out I don't know if Foot Locker is in the room here, but I don't mean to call you out, Foot Locker. But just as a contrast, to brands that have way more room to improve and what are the characteristics that define those brands. And just some of the things for Men's Warehouse is that you've already got this incredibly strong foothold in traditional search. So when people are searching for men's clothing stores near me, we find that Men's Warehouse locations, in markets where you have a location, Men's Warehouse is showing up 67% of the time. But the rate of recommendation on ChatGPT is actually above benchmark at 14%, the industry average only being 9%, but it feels a lot lower, right? And that goes back to that stat earlier about how it's 30 times harder to be recommended in AI than it is in traditional search. 14% is actually quote unquote good. But, if you're presenting that to your leadership, Ali, there may be a sense that that still needs to improve, that we still need to find those, content differentiators and additional signals from, third-party platforms and, continue to drive higher star ratings, et cetera, to really try to grow that number further. But you're already you have the sort of other fundamental signals. One thing that we're calling out here is that you have a 4.1 star rating on Google, but also that 99% of your Google profiles are linked to your social profile. So that's another signal in the LVI that we look at that we think is pretty important. And in contrast, Foot Locker is showing up 0% of the time for its primary category in the Google 3-pack. And they're also not, we don't find them being in that recommended group for the same types of queries on ChatGPT. And, correspondingly, they have a lower rate of Google profile completeness, a lower average rating, although it's not much lower, but it is a bit lower. And only 3% of their profiles have social links. So those are not necessarily, correlation is not causation, but these are some of the factors that differentiate those two brands and that we would argue tend to lead to stronger results or not as strong in the case of Foot Locker.
Damien, there was a pretty good question in here, but I know we're a little short on time. But there was one thing that maybe if we can hit on quickly.
Yeah.
Saya asked the question, are local brands getting more visibility with AI or is it primarily bigger brands? And I feel like you and I had a conversation about this somewhat recently, where there is this element of like brand authority, right? Like it's when you're a heavy hitter, when you're a big brand, sure, the odds of you appearing are great, but when it comes to LLMs, I think depending on the query and depending on even like the industry, there are some probabilities that some of those smaller, much smaller localized brands may get recommended over some of those bigger heavy hitters. So, for example, if you are looking for like a fun local coffee shop, your local coffee shop may appear far before a Starbucks would appear. If AI is assuming that you're looking for some of that kind of contextual, like fun local experience. Now, obviously, that would depend on kind of the question asked and what the user's intent is. But I think it's a little bit easier in LLMs, quite frankly, to appear if you are a really small player versus like in traditional search where the big players pretty much rule.
Yeah, it
Hmm.
very much depends on what kind of searches or recommendations we're talking about. If you asked ChatGPT to recommend an auto parts store, you know, they're probably going to recommend a CarQuest or an AutoZone or whatever because that's what there is, right? Whereas if you ask for a recommendation for a local restaurant, think about it as though you're asking another human, your neighbor, to recommend a local restaurant. They're maybe not as likely to recommend Chili's as they are, some local favorite, right? An SMB, in other words. And I think LLMs, we can assume, have a little bit of that same kind of bias for those kinds of queries, right? And that's just going to create an even bigger challenge for multi-location brands, but that's something that we've advocated for years. In fact, your exact example of Starbucks, go check the Google traditional search rankings for coffee shop near me. They're like number 20 because when
Mm,
people want a Starbucks, they type in Starbucks. When people
true.
want a coffee shop, Google already knows
Mhm.
that they're looking for something a little more unique and locally flavored or whatever. But
Very
that
true.
doesn't mean brands can't stand out more than they are right now. There is still a way to act like a local favorite as a multi-location brand, which, we talk about that all the time.
Absolutely.
Okay, so a little bit, let's see, just time check here. Okay, we
Got like,
we have a few more minutes,
yeah,
and I don't want to rush,
but
but just a few things to tie us up here. So we talked about the quadrant chart before. We talked about the leaders. Men's Warehouse is one of those leaders. In this version of the chart, we're seeing the top 100 enterprise brands in the blue up here, and then the rest of the about 450 brands in the LVI that have 500 or more locations. That's kind of what's represented here. And we talked about what defines a leader, that they're following best practices and also seeing great outcomes. In the other brands that find themselves in the other quadrants are basically lacking in one or more of those areas. But what are some of the things that the brands in the leaders quadrant do differently? So first, they treat accuracy as a strategic asset, and we've talked about Google, Yelp, Facebook, and your business website as the really critical places, although not the only ones, but the ones that you really need to focus on first. So in our top performer quadrant, they're actively managing 100% of their Google profiles, but also 93% of at least of their profiles on Yelp, and that they have at least 80% of store locations with their own Facebook page. The average brand is much worse, especially when it comes to Facebook. So coverage across all those channels, super important. They go beyond presence to differentiation. They're investing in detailed content to stand out in AI answers, which are much more selective. Right now, the top performers are averaging about 6% recommendation rate on ChatGPT, about 21.7% on Gemini, 16.9% on Perplexity. Again, this is multi-location brands. So it is a bit harder to make your way into those recommendations, as we've said. And then they win on reputation, so they'll be chosen as the best by AI, with top performers averaging a 4.5 rating on Google. And Yelp's ratings tend to be a little bit lower, but the average for leaders is 3.7 stars on Yelp. And then they're optimizing traditional and AI channels together. So we don't want to think about channel optimization for local as four separate things, but as one integrated holistic activity. Um, One example of that linkage is treating search and social as one integrated system. We mentioned Men's Warehouse has 99% of social profiles linked to Google. The average leader brand has 87%. So you want to be 87 and above by that metric. And that's just some of the metrics that define success in the LVI. We have about a minute for final thoughts or a very quick answer to a question if we have any time for that.
um, it, I don't know if I fully understand okay, so we do have one last question. Maybe we'll hit on it. AI chat, if the AI chat is specialized to the user, could the AI visibility question be different for each user based on what AI knows about them?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. So
Yeah.
AI gets to know you, and what you like, what you dislike, and you can certainly tailor your LLM of choice to even not show you certain recommendations sometimes, right? So that is unfortunately the reality that we live in. But realistically, traditional search did that too. Traditional search, you might have a totally different experience when you search something on Google than when I search something on Google. And we could be literally in the same location. So um, it's maybe just more amplified with LLMs. And with that, we're at time.
One
Awesome
more chance to
discussion. Yeah, go
download the
ahead.
report. And yeah, sorry, Casey, to talk over you.
No, it's totally fine. Yeah, like Damien said, one more opportunity, download the report, check it out. If you are a current SOCi customer, feel free to reach out to your CSM if you have any questions. The team is here to support them and get you guys answers. And Ollie, thank you so much for joining us. Seriously, great discussion. I think you brought a ton of value for our audience here today. So we really, really appreciate you and we love working with you.
No, thank you, Casey. Thank you, Damien. Thank you, everyone. It was great. And I think so it's an ongoing conversation. And then hopefully we will do this again with some good results on the AI side of it for menstruation.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Yes.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you,
Thanks.
everyone.